The morning air in Austin carried that mix of spring warmth and faint coolness that makes you think the day might still surprise you. I arrived at the convention center earlier than I needed to, clutching my leather portfolio like it was a passport to a country I'd been fighting to enter for years. Inside, the space was alive, heels clicking over marble, the low hum of voices layered with bursts of laughter from people who already seemed to know they belonged. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted from the vendor in the lobby, mingling with the faint tang of cologne and hairspray. As I crossed the polished floor, I let my eyes travel over the banners, the sleek booths, the confident clusters of founders in pressed suits rehearsing their opening lines under their breath. My own pitch sat in my head like a perfectly stacked set of dominoes, each slide and sentence placed with care, ready to fall in just the right order. My company wasn't just a product, it was proof that I could build something from nothing without a cent of my family's money, without the patronizing help I'd been offered in the past. I approached the check-in desk with a small smile, sliding my ID toward the young man tapping on a tablet. He scanned it, nodded, then reached for a seating chart. "You're in Section C, Row 5, he said, circling a spot on the map. "That's odd," I said, leaning closer. "I was told I'd have a front row seat in the investor prep section." He frowned, flipping through his list. "Oh, someone from your party requested the change." A slow, cold awareness crawled up my spine. Someone from my party? That's what the note says. He offered a helpless shrug. "Maybe they thought you'd prefer a quieter spot." I followed the chart to my new location, a lonely chair tucked behind a potted plant tall enough to block my view of the stage. It was perfect, if the goal was to make sure I felt invisible. I let my hand rest on the back of the chair for a moment, then released it. Not yet, I thought. If this was meant to unsettle me, I'd give them nothing to read. On my way to the prep lounge, I caught sight of them. My father, Orson, stood near the central aisle, tall and rigid in his charcoal suit. Beside him, my sister Mireille, polished as always in a cream blazer and gold earrings that caught the light. She was smiling, but not at anyone in particular, just the kind of smile you wear when you're certain the room knows you're the most important person in it. I slowed, debating whether to approach. There was a time I would have, hoping for a last-minute nod of support, but I'd learned better. Mireille's glance skimmed over me without a flicker of warmth, like she was noting a stranger who'd wandered too close. Orson kept his focus on the conversation he was having with a man I didn't recognize, though I noticed his posture shift ever so slightly, as if my presence registered but wasn't worth the effort of acknowledgement. I turned toward the stage entrance, weaving through the crowd. And that's when it happened. Orson's gaze met mine, deliberate, unhurried. He tilted his head a fraction, and the corner of his mouth curled into a smirk I knew too well. "Investors will laugh," he said, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear over the ambient chatter. The words landed sharp, like a slap dressed in velvet. In my mind, I could see the echoes of every other moment like this. The raised brow when I announced my college major, the dry chuckle when I showed him my first prototype, the polite but dismissive, "We'll see," that always meant, "You'll fail." I held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, then let a small, controlled smile play at my lips. Success, I thought, is the best revenge. Moving into the prep zone, I let my eyes roam over the other founders. Some were whispering through last-minute notes, hands trembling slightly as they shuffled their cue cards. Others looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate magazine, exuding confidence with every casual lean against the wall. I studied them, not with envy, but with calculation. The energy in the room was electric, and I intended to plug directly into it. A woman with a tablet checked my badge and waved me toward a side table stocked with water and coffee. I poured myself a cup, the steam curling upward, and used the moment to steady my breath. The earlier seat change, the smirk, these were just warm-up acts in a show I'd seen before. This time, the ending would be mine to write. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The first group of investors was already making their way in, their tailored suits moving like a coordinated tide. I set my coffee down, smoothing my blazer over my hips. One last look across the room found Orson again, leaning casually against a column, his expression unreadable from this distance. I let my chin lift just slightly, then turned toward the curtain that led backstage. The weight of the opportunity, the undercurrent of sabotage, they were two sides of the same coin in my pocket. I'd decide which side showed when the coin landed. As I straightened my blazer, a faint vibration buzzed against my hip. I reached into my bag, pulling out my phone. The notification on the screen made my stomach tighten. The buzz in my hand was enough to jolt me out of my focus. I just straightened my blazer and adjusted the mic pack clipped discreetly to my waistband when the notification lit up my phone screen. It was a push alert from a local business forum, the kind I usually skim over. But the headline stopped me cold. Serial dreamer at it again. Will this pitch finally stick? The article had my name right there in the opening paragraph, paired with a photo of me from 10 years ago, standing next to the prototype of my very first project, the one that had crashed and burned before it even reached the market. I felt my pulse quicken, then settle into a deliberate rhythm as I opened the link. The tone was dripping with condescension, the kind that doesn't even pretend to be objective. I scrolled through the comments. Some were laughing, making snide jokes about people who never learn. Others were defending me, reminding the critics that early failures are part of the entrepreneurial path. And the split didn't surprise me. People love to watch someone climb, but they love even more to predict a fall. The timestamp caught my attention. It had been reposted less than an hour ago. Perfectly timed to make the rounds while I was here, right before I went on stage. In business, timing isn't everything. It's the only thing. My gut told me Mireille's fingerprints were all over this. It was exactly her style. Not a direct confrontation, but a surgical little cut designed to bleed me in front of the right audience. Still, I had no proof, and confronting her without it would only make me look paranoid. I reminded myself of something I'd once read from Maya Angelou. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. I wasn't going to be reduced, not by an article dredged up from the past, not by the people who'd love to see me stumble. Tucking the phone away, I stepped out of the prep area and moved toward the lobby. The crowd was thicker now, investors arriving in tailored waves, their name badges swinging as they shook hands and traded business cards. I kept my stride even, my chin lifted just enough to convey I had a purpose that didn't involve chasing anyone's approval. As I passed one group, I caught a glance from a man holding his phone low. He looked at the screen, then up at me, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. No need to guess what he'd just read. I tightened my grip on my pitch folder, not to keep from dropping it, but to remind myself that the weight in my hands was the only thing that mattered here. I would answer whatever whisper campaign was brewing, not with words, but with the numbers and vision on those slides. I was almost to the backstage checkpoint when my phone rang again. The name on the screen stopped me. Henry Jacobs, a friend of my father's from decades back. I hadn't spoken to him in years. "Henry?" I answered, slowing my pace. "Well, Danica," he drawled, "I just heard you're up to something big today. Thought I'd call and see how my favorite Morel is doing." "I'm on my way to the stage, actually." "Oh, I won't keep you long," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just wanted to, well, let's say, offer a little friendly advice. These big pitch events, they're risky. Lot of eyes on you, lot of people ready to tear you apart if you miss a step." I could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass on his end. "Your father's worried, you know. He thinks maybe you're setting yourself up to, well, maybe not embarrass yourself exactly, but you understand." I stopped walking. "Henry, are you calling because you're genuinely concerned, or because someone asked you to slow me down?" He chuckled, low and non-committal. "I'm just saying, maybe there's no shame in taking a smaller swing. Keep something in reserve. Investors respect caution." There it was. Not advice, an echo of the same undermining message I'd been hearing my whole life. The realization clicked into place. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had sent him in to chew up my minutes, to have me arrive at the stage flustered and late. "Henry, I appreciate the call," I said, my voice steady. "But the best way to prove your concerns wrong is to start on time." I ended the call before he could reply. The stage coordinator raised an eyebrow as I handed over my badge at the checkpoint. "Cutting it close. she said, glancing at the schedule on her clipboard. I'm here, I replied simply, stepping into the narrow hallway that funneled directly toward the wings. My breathing was even, my mind rehearsing the opening lines not like a student reciting a script, but like a conductor preparing to lead an orchestra. From behind the curtain, I could hear the tail end of the previous founder's presentation, her voice strong, the audience's responses polite. The atmosphere was taut, the kind of collective focus that could either fuel you or strip you bare. The muffled applause reached my ears as the coordinator motioned me forward. I adjusted the folder in my hand, ready to take my place at the edge of the stage, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Orson. He was standing with two men in suits, one of whom I recognized from a dinner years ago, an evening where Murray had openly dismissed my startup idea over the main course. They were talking quietly, leaning in toward one another. Orson's head tipped slightly as I appeared in his peripheral vision, but he didn't acknowledge me. As the stage lights began to shift, it hit me. I wasn't just walking into a pitch, I was walking into a crossfire. I pushed through the door to the green room, my mind still running the loop of Orson murmuring to those investors. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound in the room shifted. Conversations that had been bubbling died to a low murmur, then a careful silence. I could feel the pause stretch, not long enough to be obvious, but enough to send the message. We were talking about you. The green room was warmer than the lobby, with the faint scent of coffee gone slightly stale and the undercurrent of stress that clings to people waiting their turn under the lights. A few founders pretended to fuss with their notes. One tapped nervously on his laptop, not meeting my eyes. Near the corner, I caught Ione Merrick lowering her phone quickly, the movement just a hair too fast to be casual. I knew her only in passing, sharp dress, sharper tongue when she thought her comments wouldn't be traced back to her. I set my folder on a table, keeping my body language steady. Seconds later, my tablet pinged with a new message. It was from a friend in the room next door, someone I trusted. Attached was a short video clip. I pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough to see myself, standing by the far wall, alone. Around me, clusters of other founders were chatting, greeting investors, laughing. Not one person glanced my way. The angle made it look deliberate, as if the whole room had agreed to leave me out of the frame of belonging. They want me to look like I don't belong here, I thought, my jaw tightening. Whether this was just social cowardice or something orchestrated, I couldn't be sure. But I filed it away. I wasn't going to cause a scene now. Evidence is best used when it leaves no doubt. I busied myself at the supply table, rummaging for a spare battery pack for my presentation remote. As I moved a box of cables aside, a flash of familiar paper caught my eye, sticking out of the trash bin beside the table. I pulled it free. It was my printed pitch contract template, the one I'd set in my prep folder last night. Now it was crumpled, edges soggy, and stained with what looked like coffee. The sight landed with a quiet weight in my chest. A stagehand passing by glanced at it. "Oh, that was in there this morning," he said casually. "Thought it was weird." I smoothed the page against the table, more to steady myself than to save it. Someone had been in my materials. Someone wanted me to know they'd been in my materials. The missing document wouldn't derail me. I knew every clause by heart, but that wasn't the point. This was a strike meant for the mind, not the work. I remembered something an old mentor once told me. They can't sink your ship if you keep bailing water faster than they pour it in. I'd been bailing for years. I put the paper aside and turned my attention to my laptop. Slide deck, intact. Notes, intact. Battery level, full. Every click of the keyboard was deliberate, a reminder to myself that I was in control of the one thing that mattered, the work I was about to put on that stage. The door opened again, and Calder slipped in, brushing past a pair of founders deep in conversation. He gave me a quick, searching look. "You're steady?" he asked quietly. "I'm ready," I said. "Good. Breathe, focus, and make them regret underestimating you." His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room the way a chess player reads a board. I nodded, closing my laptop with a decisive snap. "That's the plan." The stage manager appeared in the doorway. "You're up next," she announced, glancing down at her clipboard before meeting my eyes. I stood, taking my folder and tablet. The short walk toward the wings felt heavier than it should have, the air warmer, the voices behind me fading into an indistinct hum. I could feel the heat of the stage lights spilling through the curtain ahead, the muffled applause for the presenter before me rising like a cue. As my name echoed through the auditorium, I stepped forward, straight into their trap. My name echoed from the speakers, crisp and amplified, as if the syllables themselves had weight. The light spilling from the stage burned hotter than I'd expected, wrapping around me like an uninvited hand on my shoulder. From beyond the curtain, a low murmur rolled through the audience. Not quite a cheer, not quite disinterest. It was the kind of sound people make when they're curious to see if the rumors are true. Instinctively, I glanced toward the stage wings, scanning for Calder. He'd promised he'd be there, not just as a friend, but as the one person who could anchor me before I stepped into the glare. I spotted him, only he wasn't watching me. Across the hall, he was boxed in by Murray, who gestured with sharp, precise movements. Her voice was low, but her posture screamed control. Calder caught my eye and gave the smallest shake of his head, an apology written in the lines of his face. They'd pulled him away on purpose. They knew he steadied me. I tucked that recognition into the vault of things I'd remember later. A stage assistant stepped forward, a coil of wire in one hand, the small clip-on mic in the other. "Stand still for me," she said, affixing the mic to my blazer lapel. The cold metal against the fabric felt like a stamp, approval or condemnation I'd know soon enough. From where I stood, I could see Orson in the front row. His hands were clasped loosely, his shoulders relaxed in a way that told me he wasn't nervous. Not for me, but for how neatly he expected this to go his way. And there it was again, that trace of a smirk, like a private joke he'd been telling himself for years. Sorrel Duvall, the MC, took center stage. He had the smile of a man who'd been doing this for too long to feel anything but amused. "Next up," he said, his voice sliding into a cadence that felt rehearsed. "Let's see if she can convince us this time." The words, "this time," dangled in the air like a dare. A ripple of chuckles moved through the crowd, polite but unmistakably tainted with skepticism. My mind snapped to the conclusion instantly. Someone had given Sorrel a version of my story designed to amuse, not impress. I straightened my spine and let my breath settle low. Under it, I whispered to myself, "Let them laugh now." The line wasn't for anyone else. It was for the part of me that needed to hear my own conviction before I walked into the lion's mouth. The noise of the room dimmed as I pulled up a quote I'd scribbled in a journal years ago, one of Warren Buffett's. "You only have to do a very few things right in your life, so long as you don't do too many things wrong." This would be one of those right things. I decided, then and there, that the next 10 minutes were mine. No interruption, no undermining look from the front row would own them. The MC's hand swept toward me, the spotlight shifting until it bathed the space just inside the curtain. I stepped forward, the floor beneath my heels feeling solid, deliberate. The air changed, brighter, sharper, and every eye locked on me. I could sense the quick evaluations happening in those first seconds, the silent weighing of worth, not just of my idea, but of me. I drew one breath, let it out slowly, and crossed fully into view. As the first slide lit up behind me, I realized someone had changed it. The spotlight hit me fully now, blinding for half a second until my eyes adjusted. My focus drifted instinctively to the massive LED screen behind me. The slide that should have carried my company's name and logo in clean, sharp font had been replaced by a whimsical script, Project Daydream. The letters danced across the screen in pastel colors, like a parody of ambition. A ripple went through the audience, murmurs, the faint sound of a few chuckles. It wasn't confusion alone. There was recognition in it, the knowing laughter of people who had been primed to expect a joke. This wasn't a tech glitch, it was a message. Someone wanted my first impression to scream naive before I even opened my mouth. I let the pause linger just long enough to make it look intentional. Then I let one corner of my mouth curve upward. "Well," I said, my tone easy, but pitched to carry, "every big dream starts somewhere. Let me show you why this one is worth $8 million. The ripple of laughter changed, less derisive now, more uncertain. A few heads tilted forward. The energy had shifted. I moved straight into my opening points, clicking to the next slide as if nothing unusual had happened. My voice was steady, each sentence delivered with the cadence I'd rehearsed, the problem my company solved, the gap in the market, the measurable traction we'd already achieved. I avoided looking toward the front row, where Orson sat. Instead, I focused on the investors scattered through the audience. I let my gaze land on each one for a beat, signaling confidence, not desperation. This was about them, the opportunity, the future, not my father's opinion. Halfway through, though, I felt it. That pull, that instinct to look anyway. My eyes flicked to the front, and there he was, Orson, meeting my gaze with a slow, deliberate shake of his head, not aggressive, not theatrical. Just a quiet dismissal, the same one I'd grown up with. The silent statement, "You're not enough." I didn't flinch. If he wanted me to shrink, he'd have to watch me do the opposite. I let the next few sentences ring out louder, sharper, carrying a conviction that didn't ask for permission. "This projection," I said, gesturing to the chart on the screen, "is based on actual contracts already in progress, not hypothetical interest." I clicked to the next slide. "We've delivered a 42% increase in client retention in the last 2 quarters alone." As I spoke, I felt the audience leaning in again. The numbers were my territory. No one could take that from me. I pressed forward, layering data with stories of clients whose businesses had grown using our platform. My confidence was real now, not just performed. "Work like there is someone working 24 hours a day to take it away from you," I quoted, looking toward a cluster of Texas investors in the second row. "That's not paranoia, that's discipline. And it's why we're here, still growing, while others are still guessing." The slide deck moved toward my mid-pitch demo. I walked the audience through the live interface, showing exactly how a client could cut their onboarding time in half. The tech responded flawlessly, thank God, and I heard murmurs of approval, the faint click of someone taking a note. As I wrapped up the demo, a hand shot up from the investor section. My chest tightened for a fraction of a second. I recognized him instantly, the same man I'd seen in the lobby, leaning in to speak with my father. The moderator glanced my way. I gave a small nod. "Go ahead," she said to him. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket, his voice smooth. "My question isn't about your technology," he began, and I knew, before the rest of the words even came, that this wasn't going to be about my business at all. The investor in the second row rose slightly from his seat, drawing the moderator's attention. I recognized him instantly, the same man who'd been in the lobby, leaning in close to my father like they were trading state secrets. The moderator nodded, passing the microphone his way. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Is it true," he began, his tone polished and perfectly pitched for the room, "that your company owes a substantial sum to your family, and that today's pitch is essentially an attempt to cover that debt?" The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. There was a shift in the room's energy, an audible ripple as murmurs spread through the audience. I could almost feel the collective head turn toward Orson in the front row, waiting to see his reaction. Inside, a flare of heat rose to my chest, but my breathing stayed steady. I reminded myself, if you can't control the question, control the answer. I lifted the handheld clicker in my right hand like a pointer, grounding myself in the tools of my craft. "That claim is false," I said, letting the words land one by one. "My company has operated entirely on earned revenue and legitimate investment. Not a single cent of family money has been used. We've built this from the ground up, and every dollar is accounted for." The volume in the room dropped. The sting of the attack was still there, but I could feel the eyes that had been looking for weakness now measuring my composure instead. The investor's lips twitched into a half smirk, as though my answer had confirmed something only he understood. "So you'd have no objection to showing us a financial summary now, in the interest of full transparency?" "I'd be happy to," I replied smoothly, gesturing toward the AV booth. We prepared a one-page summary of our revenue streams and expense allocations for this quarter alone. No projections, just hard numbers. "Could we bring that up?" I turned toward the big screen, but before the tech crew could switch inputs, a burst of static cracked through the sound system. My voice cut out mid-sentence. The microphone clipped to my blazer fizzed, then went dead. From the front row, Orson leaned back in his seat, folding his arms, watching me with the calm interest of a man reading the last page of a book he's already skimmed. I knew the look, waiting to see if I'd falter. The stage tech rushed forward, a wireless mic in hand. "Here, use this," he said, already switching it on. I took it without hesitation. I smiled, letting my voice carry with the new mic. Looks like even the mic wasn't ready for that answer. A ripple of light laughter spread through the room, breaking the tension just enough to remind them who controlled the pace here. With the handheld mic secure, I walked toward the investor section, closing the physical gap between us. I clicked to the next slide myself, a clean, sharp bar chart of revenue growth, segmented by market category. "Transparency," I said, locking eyes with the man who'd asked the question, "isn't just a policy for us, it's a practice." I moved from the chart to a table showing client growth, contract renewals, and churn rates that were the envy of our sector. No one in this room could claim we weren't delivering results. By the time I clicked away from the financials, the applause had started. Not thunderous, but steady, with a few nods from the investors who mattered. I gave a final thank you, keeping my expression calm, even as adrenaline still pulsed under my skin. As I stepped back toward center stage, movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. Marae was slipping out the side exit, phone pressed tight to her ear, her other hand gesturing in quick, decisive motions. Whatever she was about to do in the next 5 minutes would either sabotage me completely or hand me the win of my life. Marae's quick exit was hard to miss. Phone pressed to her ear, one hand slicing the air in short, purposeful gestures, she didn't so much leave the room as vanish into her own mission. Whatever she was setting into motion, I couldn't stop it now. But I could make damn sure that, in the next few minutes, all eyes stayed locked on me. I turned back toward the screen, my finger hovering over the clicker. The next slide in my deck was the one I'd built for exactly this moment. Insurance for the kind of smear they'd just tried. A white background, black unambiguous title, Independence Integrity. The slide filled the LED wall behind me, crisp and readable even from the back row. "Since there seems to be interest in our funding sources," I began, keeping my voice measured, "let me be clear." I stepped to the side so the audience could see the entire table, revenue streams listed line by line, a neat column showing the percentage each represented, and, most importantly, a 0 beside the entry labeled personal or family loans. "Not a penny of family money has ever been used to fund this company," I said, letting each word settle. "We've stood on our own feet from day one, and we still do." A faint rustle moved through the room. Some leaned toward their neighbors, a few nodded without looking away from the screen. From the front row, Orson's posture had changed. Shoulders no longer lounging comfortably against the back of his seat, hands clasped tighter, jaw set. I stayed facing the audience, not him. My job wasn't to win my father over. It was to close this room. Then a voice from my left, steady, resonant, broke the air. "That level of preparation," it said, "is exactly what we want to fund." Heads turned toward the source. Thane Pollard, whose name carried weight in nearly every serious investment circle in Texas, was on his feet. "If you can stand under this kind of scrutiny and still deliver facts, that's leadership. That's the kind of founder who scales companies, not just starts them." The applause started in pockets, then grew, spreading until even those who'd smirked earlier were clapping. The tension that had hung over the room since my first slide fractured and fell away. I leaned into it. "Vision is only as strong as the resilience behind it," I said, raising my voice enough to ride the sound of the clapping. "Markets shift, competitors multiply, but opportunity favors those willing to stay in the fight, no matter how many times they're told they can't win." I clicked to the closing slide. 3 bullet points: scale, stability, social impact. "This isn't just a pitch," I told them. "And it's an open invitation to join us in building something that lasts." Eleanor Roosevelt's words rose unbidden in my mind, and I let them out without overthinking. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I scanned the audience, catching the eyes of those who'd be the ones to write the checks. I stopped giving mine a long time ago. The applause that followed was longer this time, not polite, but energized, I could feel the momentum shift fully into my hands, the balance of the room tilting in my favor. As I stepped back from the podium, one of the event staff hurried toward me from the wings. She leaned in, her voice low but urgent. "You'll want to see what's happening in the lobby, right now." I nodded once, tightening my grip on the clicker before passing it off. My heels found the edge of the stage, and I descended the short steps, threading past the stagehands and equipment cases toward whatever waited outside. When I stepped into the lobby, the last thing I expected was a standing crowd and 2 contracts waiting for my signature. The lobby was a wall of sound the moment I stepped into it. Voices overlapping, camera shutters clicking, the faint hum of 100 conversations colliding. People were gathered in tight clusters, but as soon as they noticed me, the circle in the center shifted, creating a clear path. 2 men stood there with portfolios in hand, one in a navy suit with a silver tie, the other in charcoal with a bold red pocket square. They didn't hesitate. The man in navy stepped forward first. "We've seen enough," he said, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "We want in, $5 million, effective immediately." The words landed like a gavel strike. The murmur in the lobby swelled, and I could see phones lifting into the air as bystanders began recording. My pulse didn't quicken. If anything, I felt the strange calm of someone who's been waiting years for this moment. We shook hands, the firm, unflinching grip of equals. "We'll have the paperwork sent to your counsel today," he added. "This, I thought, is how you answer a lifetime of doubt, by putting proof in ink." A smattering of applause broke out nearby. I caught sight of Orson and Murray on the far edge of the crowd. Orson's jaw was locked, a practiced neutral expression that was starting to crack at the edges. Murray's smile was faint, but it didn't touch her eyes. Before I could even let that first deal sink in, the man in charcoal stepped forward. "We'd like to add $3 million, he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to making decisive moves. Then, with a slight smile, "But let's make it official right now, on stage." Within minutes, I was walking back toward the main hall, flanked by the 2 investors. The audience was still in their seats, buzzing from the last segment. The moderator, catching sight of us, moved quickly to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "we have breaking news." The big screen lit up behind him with a split view, me at the table, signing both contracts, and the live feed from the document camera projecting my signature stroke by stroke. "Total new funding today," he announced, drawing out the pause. $8 million. The room erupted. This wasn't polite applause. It was the kind of standing ovation that comes when people know they've just watched something shift in real time. From the stage, I could see Orson and Murray in the front section, both on their feet, but clapping with the restrained rhythm of people forced to acknowledge what they'd hoped wouldn't happen. When the noise finally began to ebb, I stood and faced the audience. "Every founder has their critics," I said evenly. "What matters is building something that speaks for itself." I didn't need to raise my voice. Every camera in the room was trained on me, and I knew those clips would be online before I stepped off the stage. Reporters were already in motion as I left the table, their mics extended, questions overlapping. "How will you use the funding? What message do you have for young entrepreneurs facing skepticism?" I gave short, deliberate answers, each one reinforcing the story I wanted told. Backstage again, both contracts in my hand, I let myself feel the weight, not of paper, but of leverage. Years of building under scrutiny, years of sidestepping landmines laid by people who should have been allies. And now, here it was, in ink and signature, a win too public to be rewritten. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. The number was unfamiliar. I swiped to open the message. It was a single photo. Grainy, but clear enough to recognize the setting. The prep area from earlier that morning. And there, in the frame, was a hand I knew as well as my own, slipping my contract pages into a trash bin. The image on my phone screen froze me mid-step. Grainy security footage, time-stamped from earlier this morning, showing a familiar hand sliding my pitch documents into a trash bin. Even in low resolution, there was no mistaking the gold bracelet, the curve of the fingers, Murray. I let the screen dim and slipped the phone into my jacket pocket. My face stayed neutral, muscles trained from years of practice, never giving them the satisfaction of seeing the blow land. I turned toward the main hall, the sound of the audience still filtering through the heavy doors ahead. Inside, the MC was in his element. "Let's all take a moment to recognize what we've just witnessed," he boomed. $8 million in new funding secured here today. The spotlight swung briefly toward the front row, catching Orson and Murray. They weren't quick enough to mask their expressions. His mouth slightly parted in disbelief, her jaw tight, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. The venue's live feed caught it, the camera lingering for just a heartbeat too long before cutting away. But in that beat, phones lit up across the audience as people captured the moment for themselves. When I stepped onto the stage again, it wasn't for a pitch, it was for the optics. I took the mic from the MC with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Thank you," I began, my voice calm but carrying. "This kind of milestone isn't reached alone. It comes from vision, persistence, and a willingness to keep going through unexpected challenges." A low ripple of knowing laughter passed through the crowd. I let it settle into applause before handing the mic back and stepping aside. Out in the lobby, screens were already flashing. Across social media, the clip of me shutting down the debt accusation earlier in the day had resurfaced, now spliced with the close-up of Orson and Murray's frozen faces from minutes ago. Views were climbing by the second. Hashtags bloomed. Hashtag built not borrowed. Hash 8 million reasons. How Danica delivers. My phone buzzed again, a constant vibration in my hand as messages poured in. Old colleagues, former classmates, even a few competitors offering congratulations. People I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly so proud of me. But under the hum of validation, I knew the real fight wasn't over. Public momentum was on my side now, but the private battlefield hadn't shifted as much as the headlines would suggest. I'd been in this family long enough to know, you can win the room and still lose the house, unless you're ready to walk away from it entirely. I was halfway to the exit when a reporter stepped into my path, mic in hand. "Danica, are you ready to comment on the family's sabotage allegations?" I smiled for the cameras, but my answer wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the two people standing just behind them. The reporter's microphone was inches from my face, the glare of camera lights bouncing off the polished floor. Behind her, I could see Orson and Murray, close enough to hear whatever I said, but far enough to feign detachment. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a direct attack. "I've always believed," I began evenly, "that in business, your work should speak for you. Today, I think the message is loud enough for everyone to hear." The reporter started to follow up, but another journalist pushed forward, voice raised above the din. "Danica, breaking news. Our editorial team has confirmed that the anonymous email sent to multiple investors this morning, the one alleging financial instability in your company, was traced back to an account registered to your sister, Mireille Hanford." A sharp intake of breath swept the crowd. Cameras pivoted in unison toward her. Mireille froze mid-step, her phone halfway to her ear. For a fraction of a second, she looked straight at me, eyes hard, then turned as if to leave. I kept my posture relaxed, my voice steady. I believe in letting actions speak louder than words, and today, the truth spoke clearly. I handed the mic back to the reporter and stepped aside, allowing the chaos to churn without me in the middle of it. The press surged toward Mireille, questions firing from every angle. Investors exchanged low, knowing comments, a few shaking their heads. Orson's expression had gone from stony to something colder, controlled, but with a hint of calculation in the set of his jaw. I used the commotion as cover, slipping through the crowd and into the quieter corridor that led to the investor lounge. The air there was cooler, the buzz of conversation replaced by the muted tones of deal-making. A man in a tailored gray suit approached, flanked by two associates. His handshake was firm, his smile deliberate. "Mrs. Morel, we've reviewed your presentation and your data. We're ready to move forward on a strategic partnership." We stepped to a side table, papers already prepared. "Our board approved it this morning," he continued, "but after what we saw today, there's no doubt we want you on board." Minutes later, the announcement echoed back into the main hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice carried over the PA, Please join me in congratulating Danica Morell on securing a multi-million-dollar partnership with Novatech Systems. Applause swelled again, the kind that felt less like politeness and more like momentum. The big screen showed me shaking hands with the Novatech executives. In the corner of the frame, Orson and Murray were visible, standing, smiling just enough to match the crowd, but their eyes tight. I could almost feel the shift in the air. This wasn't just a good day, it was a reversal. For years I had been playing defense, bracing against the next hit. Now, they were the ones reacting to me. Colin Powell's words came to mind. Success is the result of perfection, hard work, learning from failure, loyalty, and persistence. I'd lived all of it, but this was the payoff you could see and touch. I walked out of the lounge with the Novatech folder under my arm, my phone vibrating again. Calder's name lit the screen. I answered with a quiet, "Talk to me." "Meet me outside," he said. "There's one more thing you need to know before the press conference." I stepped toward the exit, bracing for whatever revelation could possibly top the day I'd just had. Calder was waiting where he said he'd be, under the broad shade of an oak tree in the courtyard. The air out here was cooler, the hum of the conference fading into something calmer, though the faint echo of the PA system still carried through the open doors. He didn't waste time. "They're putting together a national feature," he said, handing me a folded printout. "Front page of the business section. Headlines locked. Self-made CEO overcomes public sabotage, secures record funding." I scanned the draft. It was clean, confident. None of the usual qualifiers people love to slip into my story. No, despite being a woman, no, coming from a troubled family. Just facts, results, and a photo of me at the signing table. Before I could respond, Calder reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a formal envelope, the kind with weight to it. "This came from the lead investment group," he said. "They want you on their advisory board." I broke the seal and read the letter. It was straightforward, an invitation to join the board that would oversee major funding decisions for the region. The same table that, not long ago, was full of people who wouldn't take my calls. There wasn't a moment of hesitation. "Tell them I accept," I said. "If I can open doors for others who've been dismissed like I was, then it's worth it." Calder's mouth tipped into a half-smile. "That's exactly what I told them you'd say." We didn't have to wait long for Orson and Murray. They approached slowly, the first time all day without a crowd to play to. Orson's hands were in his pockets, his expression carefully measured. Murray hung back, arms crossed, eyes darting between me and the path back inside. "I underestimated you," Orson said finally, his voice even. "Yeah," I said. "You did." Murray didn't speak, but her jaw tightened. I met both their eyes in turn. "I'll always value family," I said. "But I won't tolerate sabotage disguised as concern. If we're going to have a relationship from here on, it's going to be on my terms, professionally and personally." Orson's gaze held mine for a moment longer. Then he gave a single nod. Murray looked away. The words didn't feel cruel coming out of my mouth. They felt necessary, a declaration of independence without the satisfaction or the regret of burning the bridge entirely. As they stepped back, I turned toward Calder again. Inside, my thoughts were steadier than they had been in years. The hunger for their approval had dulled, replaced by something cleaner: respect for myself. Oprah's voice, from a quote I'd carried for years, rose in my mind. "You get in life what you have the courage to ask for." I had asked, I had fought, and I had taken. As we walked toward the side entrance, Calder leaned in. "Enjoy tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, we make the headlines." I didn't know then that the headlines would lead to a phone call I'd been waiting my whole career to receive. The press area was already a wall of flashing lights and overlapping voices when I stepped into it. Microphones jutted forward from every angle, and the air smelled faintly of hot cables and coffee gone cold. I knew this wasn't just another interview scrum. My words here would decide how the day would be remembered, and how my family's role in it would be cemented. Before I could speak, a reporter swiveled sharply toward Orson and Murray. "Are you proud now of what she's built?" Orson's mouth opened, then closed again, his eyes scanning for an exit in the question. Murray stood perfectly still, jaw clenched, lips pressed into a fine line. I stepped in before the silence could calcify into pity. "I've always valued their presence in my life," I said, turning slightly toward them, but keeping my gaze on the press, even when they didn't value mine. The collective intake of breath was almost as loud as the clicks from the cameras. The sentence was already being clipped, polished, and sent into the bloodstream of the internet. I could feel it. I pivoted fully toward the reporters. "Here's what matters," I continued. "The funding we secured today came entirely from the strength of our business model. The partnerships announced are the result of years of consistent delivery and trust building. And the advisory board seat I accepted this morning will give me the ability to help shape the future of funding in this region." Questions started to fly, but before I could choose one, Calder stepped forward from the crowd. In his hand was the engraved pen I'd used to sign the contracts earlier. He offered it to me with the kind of deliberate pause that made every camera in the circle swing toward us. I held it up so they could all see. "This pen," I said, letting the metal catch the sunlight, "will be used to sign our first grant for female-led startups in Texas." Applause broke out, not the staged kind, but genuine. The kind that rises when a moment belongs to more than one person. This was bigger than me now, and the room knew it. When the noise settled, I walked toward Orson and Murray. I gave them each a polite nod, nothing more. No handshake, no pretense of reconciliation. Forgiveness is optional, I thought. Boundaries are not. I turned back to the press, fielding the remaining questions with the same measured confidence I'd carried on stage. Each answer was another brick laid in the version of this story I wanted told, one that couldn't be rewritten by anyone else's spin. Gradually, the crowd began to thin. Camera tripods were collapsed, mic flags tucked into bags. The light softened as the media crews packed up. My phone buzzed again, this time with an international number I knew by heart. I answered, a calm smile already forming. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Because this time the world wasn't laughing, it was listening.